The sun was setting over the Texas frontier when everything changed for 17-year-old Rebecca. She stood outside their small cabin, watching her mother argue with a Comanche warrior over a horse. But this wasn't a normal trade. Her mother wasn't offering money or goods. She was offering Rebecca. The young warrior's name was Comanche. He sat tall on his painted horse, his long black hair braided with leather strips and feathers. His face showed no emotion as Rebecca's mother kept talking, her voice desperate and sharp at the same time. Rebecca couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own mother was trying to trade her away like she was nothing more than a sack of flour or a piece of furniture. The words felt unreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. "Mama, no," Rebecca whispered, her voice shaking. "Please don't do this." Her mother, Ellen, didn't even look at her. She just kept pointing at the strong mare the warrior had brought, talking about how they needed that horse to survive, how without it they'd all starve. Everything had fallen apart after Rebecca's father died 6 months ago. He'd been kicked by a mule and never woke up. Since then, the debts kept piling up. The crops failed. The neighbors stopped helping. Ellen had become harder, colder, like winter had settled into her heart and never left. Rebecca had 3 younger siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, all under 10 years old. They watched from the cabin window with wide, frightened eyes. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew it was bad. "We can find another way." Rebecca tried again, her hands shaking. "I can work harder. We can sell the chickens, the plow, anything else," but Ellen shook her head. She'd already made up her mind. Her brother had a ranch in New Mexico, and she needed a strong horse to get her family there. This was the only way she could see to save her younger children. In her mind, she was making an impossible choice. But to Rebecca, it felt like being thrown away. Comanche finally spoke. His English was broken but clear enough. "I come for horses, not for girl." For a moment, Rebecca felt a flash of hope. Maybe he would refuse. Maybe this nightmare would end. But Ellen kept pushing. She lowered her price. She begged. She made Rebecca sound like she was strong, a hard worker, someone who could cook and sew and do anything needed. She sold her daughter like livestock at an auction. Rebecca watched the warrior's face. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Not desire or cruelty, but something else. Something tired and sad. He looked at Rebecca for a long moment, and she stared back, trying to show him she wasn't some weak thing to be owned. Then he nodded once. The trade was done. Ellen took the horse's reins with both hands, gripping them like they were made of gold. She tied the horse to the post and went inside without a word to Rebecca. No goodbye, no hug, no tears. She just walked away. Rebecca stood frozen, her whole world crashing down around her. She'd always known her mother was practical, even harsh sometimes. But this was something she never imagined. The woman who'd given birth to her, who'd braided her hair when she was small, who'd taught her to read, had just traded her away. Comanche dismounted from his horse. He pulled a long leather cord from his belt and approached Rebecca slowly, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. His movements were careful, not rough. He tied the cord loosely around her wrist, loose enough that it didn't hurt, but tight enough that she couldn't slip free. Rebecca wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to fight. But what good would it do? Where would she go? Her mother had made her choice. Her family was inside that cabin, probably already planning their journey west without her. "Walk," Comanche said quietly, gesturing toward the hills in the distance. Rebecca's legs felt like lead, but she moved. Each step took her farther from the only home she'd ever known. She looked back once and saw smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. Her mother was making dinner for the children who still mattered to her. That's when the tears finally came. They walked for hours as the sun disappeared and stars filled the sky. Comanche didn't speak. He didn't hurt her or drag her along. He just walked steadily, leading his horse with one hand while the leather cord connecting them to Rebecca stayed slack in his other hand. Rebecca's mind raced with fear and anger. What would happen to her? Would she be forced to marry this stranger? Would she become a slave? Would she ever see another white person again? The stories she'd heard about captives taken by Comanche tribes ran through her head, each one more terrifying than the last. But as the night wore on and nothing terrible happened, her panic began to shift into something else: exhaustion, numbness, a strange, empty feeling where her heart used to be. Comanche stopped once to let her drink from a stream. He didn't watch her like a prisoner. He just waited patiently, his face turned toward the horizon. In the moonlight, Rebecca could see he was young, probably not much older than 20. There were no scars on his face, no cruel twist to his mouth. He just looked tired. Deeply, deeply tired. Why? Rebecca finally asked, her voice hoarse. Why did you take me? Kohana was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, I don't know. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her all day. As they continued walking, Rebecca realized something strange. Kohana seemed as confused about this situation as she was. He'd come to trade for horses, he'd said. He hadn't been looking for a captive. So why had he agreed? Maybe he felt sorry for her. Maybe he saw something in her desperate mother's eyes that reminded him of his own struggles. Maybe he was just tired of arguing. Whatever the reason, Rebecca was now tied to this stranger, walking away from everything she'd ever known. The hills grew steeper. The air grew colder, and Rebecca's old life grew smaller and smaller behind her, until it disappeared completely into the darkness. When dawn broke, she could see smoke rising in the distance. A camp, his people, her new reality, whether she wanted it or not. Kohana looked at her once more before they descended the final hill. His eyes held something that might have been regret, or maybe just resignation. Then he turned away and led her down toward the life she never chose, traded away by the woman who was supposed to love her most. The Comanche camp was nothing like Rebecca had imagined. She'd expected chaos and violence, but instead she found order and routine. Families gathered around morning fires. Children played with dogs. Women worked on hides while talking and laughing together. It looked almost normal, except everything was completely foreign to her. Kohana led her through the camp without speaking. People stared at her with curious eyes but didn't approach. Some women whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Rebecca couldn't understand their words, but their expressions said enough. They weren't happy about her presence. They stopped at a teepee that stood slightly apart from the others. The leather covering was weathered but well made, decorated with painted symbols Rebecca didn't recognize. Kohana stood outside for a long moment, his hand on the entrance flap. He seemed reluctant to go in, like the teepee held something painful inside. Finally, he pushed the flap aside and gestured for Rebecca to enter. Inside, the teepee was dim and cool. As her eyes adjusted, Rebecca saw it was arranged with care. Sleeping robes were folded neatly on one side. Parfleche bags hung from the lodge poles. Cooking tools sat ready by a cold fire pit. Everything was in its place, but there was something strange about it all. It looked frozen in time, like a home where nobody really lived anymore. Kohana pointed to a spot near the back. You sleep there. Then he left without another word. Rebecca sat down on the hard ground, hugging her knees to her chest. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a cold wave. She was alone in a Comanche camp, surrounded by people whose language she didn't speak, owned by a man she didn't know. Her mother had traded her away like she was worth nothing more than a horse. The tears came again, hot and angry. She cried until she had nothing left, until her throat hurt and her eyes burned. Then she just sat there, numb and empty, staring at the teepee walls. Over the next few days, Rebecca began to understand more about Kohana, though not through words. An old woman brought her food and gestured at tasks she should do. The woman's face was kind but firm. She showed Rebecca how to fetch water, how to gather firewood, how to keep the fire going. Through broken gestures and simple words, Rebecca learned the old woman's name was Pohai. She seemed to be some kind of grandmother to everyone in the camp, always moving from teepee to teepee, helping where she was needed. Pohai spoke almost no English, but she communicated clearly enough. When Rebecca didn't understand, Pohai would show her again patiently until Rebecca got it right. Despite everything, Rebecca found herself grateful for the old woman's presence. She was the only person who treated Rebecca like a human being instead of a problem. Kohana barely spoke to Rebecca. He came and went from the teepee like she wasn't there. In the mornings, he'd leave before dawn. He'd return at night, eat whatever food was there, and sleep on the opposite side of the teepee. He never touched her. Never even looked at her directly. It was like living with a ghost, but Rebecca watched him. She had nothing else to do, so she observed, and what she saw was a man carrying enormous pain. Kohana moved through the camp like he was underwater. Other warriors would call out to him, friendly and loud, but his responses were quiet and brief. Young women would smile at him as he passed, but he never smiled back. Children would run up to him with excitement, but he'd pat their heads absently and keep walking. One evening, an older man came to the teepee. He spoke to Kohana in their language, his voice gentle but insistent. Kohana's responses were short, his jaw tight. The conversation went back and forth several times before the older man finally left, shaking his head sadly. Pohai came by shortly after. She looked at Kohana, then at Rebecca, then sighed heavily. She sat down and began speaking in a mixture of Comanche, English words, and gestures. It took a long time, but Rebecca finally understood the story she was trying to tell. Kohana had been married. His wife's name had been Ayana. She'd been young and gentle, loved by everyone in the tribe. They'd been married less than 2 years when she became pregnant. Everyone had been happy for them. Kohana had been preparing for fatherhood, excited about the new life coming. But when the time came for the baby to be born, something went wrong. Terribly wrong. Ayana labored for 2 days. The medicine women did everything they could, but in the end, both Ayana and the baby boy died. That had been 6 months ago. Pohai's eyes filled with tears as she told the story. She touched her chest over her heart, then pointed to the teepee around them. This was Ayana's home, she said in halting English. Kohana keeps everything same. Cannot let go. Rebecca looked around the teepee with new eyes. Now she understood why everything felt frozen. This wasn't Kohana's home anymore. It was a shrine to a dead woman. He was living in a memory surrounded by ghosts. The elders, Pohai continued, struggling with the English words, they say Kohana must take new wife, must live again. But he says no to many girls. Good girls, she gestured at Rebecca. Then he brings you. Everyone confused. Why white girl? Why captive? Rebecca shook her head. I don't know. I didn't want to come here. Pohai patted her hand. Life brings strange things. Maybe you here for reason. After Pohai left, Rebecca sat thinking about what she'd learned. Kohana hadn't wanted a wife or a captive. So why had he traded for her? What had he seen in that moment outside her cabin that made him say yes to her mother's desperate offer? That night, Kohana returned late. Rebecca was supposed to be asleep, but she was watching him through barely open eyes. He stood in the center of the teepee, just standing there in the darkness. His shoulders were slumped. His head was bowed. He looked utterly defeated. Then he did something that broke Rebecca's heart despite everything. He walked to where some of Ayana's belongings hung on the wall. He touched a beaded bag so gently his fingers trembling. He whispered something in Comanche, his voice cracking with emotion. He was talking to his dead wife. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. She'd been so focused on her own pain and anger that she hadn't really thought about his. They were both prisoners in their own ways. Her mother had sold her. His grief had trapped him. 2 broken people stuck together by chance and desperation. The next morning, Rebecca decided something. She might be stuck here, but she wouldn't be invisible. She wouldn't let him ignore her existence. When Kohana came back to the teepee that evening, she spoke to him directly for the first time since they'd arrived. Why did you trade for me? He stopped, surprised that she'd addressed him. He stood there for a long moment, his face unreadable in the firelight. I don't know, he finally said, the same answer he'd given before. That's not good enough, Rebecca said, her voice stronger than she felt. You changed my whole life. You took me from everything I knew. You must have had a reason. Kohana's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he'd just walk away like he always did, but instead he sat down across the fire from her. It was the first time he'd really looked at her since that first night. When I saw you, he said slowly, searching for English words. You were angry, fighting. Your mother selling you. But you still fighting. He paused. I am dead inside. But you still alive, still fighting. I think maybe. He trailed off, unable to finish. You thought maybe what? Rebecca pressed. He shook his head. I don't know. It was a mistake, maybe. Well, we're both stuck with this mistake now, Rebecca said. So what happens next? Kohana looked at her with those tired, sad eyes. I don't know that either. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling between them. 2 lost souls who didn't choose each other, trying to figure out how to exist in the same space. It wasn't understanding. It wasn't friendship. But it was the first real conversation they'd had. And somehow that felt like a beginning of something, even if neither of them knew what that something was. Rebecca woke up the next morning with a decision made. If she was going to be stuck here, she wasn't going to make it easy. She wasn't going to be the quiet, obedient captive everyone probably expected. If Kohana wanted to keep her here, he was going to regret it. Her first act of rebellion came at breakfast. Pohai had shown her how to make a simple cornmeal dish, carefully explaining each step. Rebecca nodded and smiled like she understood perfectly. Then, when she was alone, she deliberately burned it. Not just a little burned, completely black and inedible. When Kohana came back and saw the ruined food, he just stared at it for a moment. Then he looked at Rebecca. She stared back, her chin raised defiantly. He could punish her if he wanted. She was ready for it, but he didn't. He just picked up the burned pot, dumped it out, and left to find food elsewhere. No anger, no violence. Just quiet acceptance that made Rebecca even angrier somehow. She wanted him to react, to show some emotion, to acknowledge that she was making his life difficult. His indifference felt worse than punishment. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca found new ways to resist. When she was supposed to soften leather by chewing it, a task that made her jaw ache, she'd chew it incorrectly on purpose, making it stiff and useless. When she was given thread and told to mend his clothes, she'd sew the stitches so loose they'd fall apart immediately. When she was sent to gather firewood, she'd bring back green wood that would smoke terribly when burned. The other women in the camp noticed. They'd watch her with a mixture of amusement and concern. Some would whisper and shake their heads. Others would laugh quietly behind their hands. A few looked at her with something like respect, as if they admired her spirit even if they thought she was foolish. Pohai tried to correct her, showing her again and again how to do things properly. The old woman's patience seemed endless, but even she was getting frustrated. She'd gesture emphatically, her wrinkled face stern, trying to make Rebecca understand that this behavior would only hurt her in the end. But Rebecca didn't care. Every ruined task felt like a small victory. Every moment of difficulty she caused Kohana felt like justice for being taken from her home. The strange thing was, Kohana never punished her. Other men in the camp would have beaten a captive for far less. Rebecca had seen it happen to another captive woman who'd tried to run away. The punishment had been swift and harsh. But Kohana just watched Rebecca's small rebellions with those dark, unreadable eyes and said nothing. It confused her. It also made her bolder. One afternoon, she was given a beautiful buffalo hide to scrape and soften. It was valuable, meant to be traded or made into something important. Rebecca knew this. Pohai had explained it carefully, stressing how important it was not to ruin it. Rebecca looked at the hide. Then she looked at the scraping tool in her hand. Then she deliberately cut a long slash right through the middle of it. This time, there was a reaction. Kohana returned that evening and saw the ruined hide. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw real anger flash in his eyes. "Why?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Why you do this?" Rebecca stood up, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Because I'm not your property. Because you can't just take people and expect them to be grateful. Because I didn't ask for any of this." "No one asked for hard things in life," Kohana shot back, his English rougher when he was angry. "You think you only one with pain? You think you only one who lose everything? I don't care about your pain," Rebecca shouted. "You chose to trade for me. I didn't choose anything. My own mother sold me like I was nothing, and you bought me like I was an animal. So yes, I'm going to make your life difficult. I'm going to fight every single day because that's all I have left." They stood there, facing each other across the fire, both breathing hard. The air between them crackled with tension. Then Kohana did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, not really a laugh at all. "You want to fight? Fight then. Break everything. Ruin everything. It changes nothing. You still here. I still here. We both still in pain." He turned to leave, then stopped at the teepee entrance. Without looking back, he said quietly, "Your anger, I understand. I am angry too. Angry at death, angry at world. Angry I still here when they not?" His voice cracked slightly. "So you want to break things? You want to fight what cannot change? I understand. Because I do same thing every day." Then he left, leaving Rebecca standing alone with her anger suddenly deflated. She sat down heavily, the ruined buffalo hide at her feet. For the first time, she really heard what he'd said. He was fighting too. Fighting his grief, his loss, his pain. He moved through life like a ghost because he didn't want to be alive anymore. Every day he woke up was a day he had to face a world without the people he loved. Her rebellion suddenly felt smaller, almost petty. She was angry at him, but he was just as trapped as she was. He was trapped by grief while she was trapped by circumstance. Neither of them wanted to be in this situation. That night she didn't burn the food. She actually tried to make it properly. It wasn't great, but it was edible. When Kohana came back and saw it, he looked surprised. He sat down and ate in silence, and Rebecca ate across from him. Neither spoke, but something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but maybe the smallest beginning of understanding. The next day, an older warrior came to the teepee. He spoke to Kohana in their language, his tone formal and serious. Kohana's responses were reluctant, but he finally nodded in agreement. After the man left, Kohana looked at Rebecca. "The council, they say you must learn. Learn our ways. Learn to be useful. They say if you cannot learn, you will be given to someone else. Someone not patient." The threat was clear. Rebecca had heard stories about some of the other warriors, men who were known for their cruelty. She'd seen how some treated their captives. The thought of being given to one of them made her blood run cold. "They give me more time," Kohana continued, "but you must try. No more breaking things. No more burning food. You try or they take you away." Rebecca swallowed hard. "And if I try? If I learn? What then?" Kohana shrugged. "Then you survive. That is enough, is it?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Is survival really enough?" Kohana looked at her for a long moment. "For me, yes. I survive each day. That is all I can do. Maybe for you too, that is all there is." He started to turn away, but Rebecca called out, "Wait, the woman you lost, Ayanna. Did she think survival was enough?" Kohana froze. His back went rigid. When he turned back, his eyes were filled with pain and anger. "You do not speak of her. You have no right." "Maybe not," Rebecca said, her voice gentle now. "But I don't think she'd want you to just survive. I think she'd want you to live." "You know nothing," Kohana said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're right. I don't know anything about her. But I know about love. My father loved us. Before he died, he lived every day fully. He laughed, he sang. He made every moment count. And when he died, it broke us. But he wouldn't have wanted us to stop living. He would have wanted us to remember him by living the way he did." Kohana stood very still, his fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, Rebecca thought he might yell at her or storm out, but instead his shoulders sagged slightly. "It is easier to be dead inside," he whispered. "It hurts less." "Maybe," Rebecca agreed. "But is it what she would have wanted?" He didn't answer. He just walked out into the night, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts. She'd pushed him, maybe too far. But something told her that he needed to be pushed. That he'd been stuck in his grief for so long that he'd forgotten there was any other way to be. That night, Rebecca made a decision. She would try. Not for Kohana, not for the council, but for herself. She would learn their ways. Not because she accepted being here, but because she needed to survive. And maybe, just maybe, she could help a broken man remember how to live again. It wasn't forgiveness for what had happened to her. It wasn't acceptance of her situation. It was simply a choice to stop fighting battles she couldn't win and start focusing on the ones she could. Tomorrow she would begin learning properly. She would try to understand the strange new world she'd been forced into. Not because she wanted to, but because sometimes survival means adapting, even when every part of you wants to fight. And who knows, maybe in learning to survive she might find a way to actually live again too. The morning after Rebecca decided to try, everything changed. Pohai arrived at the teepee earlier than usual, her weathered face showing a hint of surprise when she found Rebecca already awake and waiting. The old woman studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this change was real or just another trick. Rebecca met her gaze steadily. "I want to learn. Really learn this time." Pohai's eyes crinkled at the corners, the closest thing to a smile Rebecca had seen from her. She nodded once, then gestured for Rebecca to follow. The lessons began immediately. Pohai took her to where a group of women were working on various tasks. Some were sewing, others were preparing food, and a few were working on hides. The women looked up as Rebecca approached. their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. Pohai spoke to them in Comanche, her tone firm. Whatever she said made the women nod, though some still looked doubtful. One younger woman rolled her eyes but didn't protest. For the first time, Rebecca tried to actually learn. Pohai showed her how to properly scrape a hide, the angle to hold the tool, how much pressure to use. Rebecca's arms burned from the effort and her hands quickly developed blisters, but she didn't stop. Every time she started to do it wrong, Pohai would gently correct her, guiding her hands to the right position. The work was hard, harder than anything Rebecca had done back home. Her mother had made her do chores, but nothing like this. This was survival work, the kind of labor that meant the difference between having shelter and clothing or going without. As the days passed, Pohai began teaching her other skills. How to identify which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. How to dig for roots that could be stored for winter. How to prepare pemmican, a mixture of dried meat and berries that could last for months. How to sew with sinew thread, making stitches small and tight so they wouldn't come apart. But more than just skills, Pohai taught her words. Simple words at first: fire, water, food, sky, sun, moon. She'd point at things and say the Comanche word, then have Rebecca repeat it until she got it right. Some words were easy, flowing naturally from Rebecca's tongue. Others were harder, with sounds she'd never made before. The other women slowly began to warm to her. When Rebecca successfully scraped her first hide without ruining it, one of the younger women actually clapped. When she managed to sew a straight seam, another woman nodded with approval. They still didn't trust her completely, but they were starting to see her as something more than just a troublesome captive. Through Pohai's broken English and patient gestures, Rebecca began to understand more about Kohana. She learned that before Ayana's death, he'd been different, happy even. He'd been known for his skill with horses and his generosity. People had liked being around him. Children had followed him everywhere, and he'd always had time to play with them or teach them things. Ayana had changed his life completely. She'd been the daughter of a respected elder, and everyone had been surprised when she chose Kohana, who came from a less prominent family. But she'd loved him completely, and he'd loved her the same way. They'd been one of those couples that made everyone else believe in love. When she died, something in Kohana died too. He still did his duties as a warrior. He still hunted and provided for himself. But the light had gone out of him. He moved through life like he was just waiting for it to be over. The elders worry, Pohai explained one day as they gathered plants. A warrior must have strong spirit. Kohana's spirit is broken. They want him to take new wife, have new family, but he says no to everyone. Why did he take me then? Rebecca asked, a question that still puzzled her. Pohai was quiet for a moment, considering. I think maybe he sees something in you. Something that reminds him he still feels things. Even anger is better than nothing. You make him angry, you make him feel. Maybe that is why. It was a strange thought. That her rebellion, her anger, had somehow awakened something in a man who'd been dead inside. Not love, certainly not that, but feeling. The ability to react to something outside his own grief. As autumn began to settle over the plains, Kohana started taking Rebecca out to learn to ride. It wasn't a kindness or a privilege. It was necessity. The camp moved frequently, following the buffalo herds and seeking better grazing for their horses. Everyone needed to know how to ride, especially when they might need to move quickly. But these riding lessons became something different from her time with the other women. Away from the camp, away from watching eyes, Kohana began to speak more. Not a lot, but more than his usual silence. He taught her to ride the Comanche way, which was completely different from how white settlers rode. He showed her how to hang low on the side of a horse, using it as a shield. How to guide a horse with just her knees, leaving her hands free. How to read a horse's mood and work with it instead of against it. You are good with horses, he observed one day, surprise in his voice. Natural. My father taught me, Rebecca said. He loved horses. Said they were smarter than most people. A ghost of a smile crossed Kohana's face. He was right. These rides became the best part of Rebecca's day. Out on the plains, with the wind in her face and the endless sky above, she could almost forget she was a captive. For a little while, she could just be herself again. And Kohana seemed different out here too. Away from the teepee that held all his memories. Away from the camp where everyone watched him with worried eyes. He relaxed slightly, Sometimes he'd point out things on the horizon, teaching her to read the land, how to spot water from far away, how to tell if a storm was coming, how to find direction by the stars. One day, as they rested the horses by a small stream, Rebecca asked him something that had been on her mind. "Why do you come out here? To teach me, I mean. You could have someone else do it." Kohana was quiet for a long time, staring out at the horizon. Finally, he said, "Out here I can breathe. In camp, everything reminds me of what I lost. Every place, every person." Her laugh was everywhere. Her smile. Her voice. "Out here there are no memories. Is that better or worse?" Rebecca asked. He thought about it. "Both. Better because it doesn't hurt so much. Worse because I forget her face sometimes. Then I feel guilty for forgetting." "I don't think you could ever really forget her," Rebecca said gently. "Love doesn't work that way." "How do you know?" Kohana asked, not challenging, just curious. "My father. Even though he's gone, I see him in everything. In the sunrise because he always woke early. In horses because he loved them. In my smile because everyone says I smile like him. He's gone, but he's everywhere. I think that's how real love works. It becomes part of you." Kohana turned to look at her. Really look at her. Maybe for the first time since they'd met. "You loved your father very much." "Yes, that's why it hurts so much that my mother could just throw me away. If my father had been alive, he never would have let that happen." "Maybe your mother loved you too," Kohana said slowly. "Maybe throwing you away was the only way she could save the others. Sometimes love looks like terrible things." Rebecca hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so angry at her mother, so hurt by the betrayal, that she hadn't considered that maybe, in her own twisted way, Ellen had thought she was making an impossible choice. It didn't make it right. It didn't make it hurt less. But it made it slightly more understandable. As they rode back to camp that day, Rebecca realized something had shifted between them. They weren't friends exactly. He'd still taken her against her will, and she was still a captive. But they were starting to see each other as people. Not captor and captive, not warrior and prize. Just two people carrying their own pain, trying to survive in a world that had been cruel to both of them. Kohana began to teach her more after that. Not just practical skills, but about his people. He taught her about the stars and the stories his people told about them. About the sacred nature of the buffalo and how they used every part, wasting nothing. About honor and courage, not in battle, but in everyday life. And Rebecca found herself teaching him things too. About her world, her beliefs, her dreams for the future she'd lost. About books and reading. About music and songs from her childhood. About the farm her father had loved and the life she'd thought she'd have. Sometimes during these conversations, Kohana would laugh. Just a little, just barely, but it was there. The first time it happened, Rebecca stopped talking, so surprised by the sound. Kohana noticed her staring, and the laugh died away, replaced by his usual stoic expression. "Sorry," he muttered. "I should not—" "No," Rebecca interrupted. "Don't apologize for laughing. It's good. It means you're still alive." He looked at her with those deep, sad eyes. "Sometimes I forget I am." "Then I'll remind you," Rebecca said, surprising herself with her own words, and somehow, in that moment, without either of them really planning it, they became something more than just captor and captive. They became two people helping each other remember how to be human again. The lessons continued day after day, and slowly both of them began to heal in ways neither expected. Rebecca was learning to survive in this new world, and Kohana was learning something even harder, how to live again after loss. Winter was approaching when everything changed again. Rebecca had been with the tribe for nearly 3 months. She could speak enough Comanche now to have basic conversations. She knew how to prepare food, work hides, and ride well enough that she didn't slow the group down when they moved camp. She was no longer just a captive in everyone's eyes. She was becoming part of the community, even if she'd never fully belong. The air had turned cold and the camp was preparing for the harsh months ahead. Everyone worked harder, storing food, repairing teepees, gathering extra firewood. There was a tension in the air too, something Rebecca couldn't quite name. The warriors seemed more alert, more watchful. Pohai explained that winter was a dangerous time. Rival tribes would raid each other for horses and supplies. Everyone needed to be ready. Rebecca had heard stories about raids from the other women. Most captives who tried to escape did so during raids when the chaos and confusion gave them a chance to slip away. Some succeeded. Others were caught and punished severely. A few were killed in the crossfire. The thought stayed with Rebecca even though she tried to push it away. She could run. During a raid, she might actually make it. She could find her way to a white settlement back to her own people. But then what? Her mother had made it clear she wasn't wanted. Her siblings would be in New Mexico by now, probably believing she was dead. She had nowhere to go, no one waiting for her. Still, freedom was freedom. Wasn't it worth trying? The raid came on a cold morning just before dawn. Rebecca was jolted awake by screaming and the thunder of hooves. For a moment she was confused, still caught between sleep and waking. Then she heard Kohana shouting orders, saw him grabbing his weapon. "Stay here," he commanded, then rushed out of the teepee. But Rebecca couldn't just stay there while chaos erupted around her. She crawled to the entrance and looked out. The camp was in complete disorder. Riders were charging through, their faces painted, shooting arrows and striking with clubs. These weren't Comanche. They were from another tribe, here to steal horses and whatever else they could take. Women were grabbing children and running. Warriors were fighting back, trying to protect their families and property. Horses were screaming and running in all directions. Fire arrows lit up the early morning darkness, setting some teepees ablaze. Rebecca saw other captives running, taking advantage of the chaos. No one was watching them. No one had time to care. They were disappearing into the darkness and no one was stopping them. This was her chance. This might be her only chance. She started to move, started to run in the direction the others had gone. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Freedom. She could taste it. Just a little farther and she'd be away from all of this. Then she heard a sound that made her stop cold. A shout of pain. Kohana's voice. She should have kept running. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to keep going. He'd bought her. He'd taken her from her home. She owed him nothing, but her feet wouldn't move forward. Instead, they turned around. She saw Kohana near the horse herd fighting off 3 raiders. He was skilled, fast, but he was outnumbered. As Rebecca watched, one of the raiders shot an arrow that caught Kohana in the shoulder. He stumbled, his weapon dropping from his hand. The raiders moved in for the kill. Rebecca didn't think. She just ran. She'd seen Pohai gathering medicinal plants and had learned which ones could help with wounds. Her mind raced through the lessons even as her feet carried her toward the fight. She grabbed a burning branch from a fire pit and swung it at the nearest raider's horse. The animal reared and bolted, throwing off its rider. She screamed as loud as she could, making as much noise as possible. It worked. The raiders, confused by this white woman charging at them with fire, hesitated just long enough. Other Comanche warriors reached them, and the raiders scattered, taking a few horses but abandoning their attack. The raid was over as quickly as it had begun, the enemy riders disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Rebecca dropped the branch and ran to Kohana. He was on his knees, blood spreading across his chest from where the arrow protruded from his shoulder. His face was pale, twisted with pain. "You stupid woman," he gasped. "You should have run." "Shut up," Rebecca said, her hands shaking as she examined the wound. "We need to get you somewhere safe." With the help of another warrior, she got Kohana back to his teepee. The arrow had gone deep but hadn't hit anything vital. Rebecca knew if she could stop the bleeding and prevent infection, he'd survive. She worked with Pohai, who had appeared almost immediately, to break off the arrow shaft and remove it. Kohana bit down on a leather strap, sweat pouring down his face, but he didn't cry out. Rebecca packed the wound with yarrow leaves, just as Pohai had taught her, then bound it tightly with clean cloth. Throughout the long hours that followed, as dawn broke and the camp assessed its losses, Rebecca stayed by Kohana's side. She changed his bandages. She gave him water. She made sure he rested even when he insisted he needed to help with repairs. Other warriors came by to check on him. They looked at Rebecca with new eyes now. She'd had a chance to escape, but instead she'd saved one of their own. That meant something to them. As evening fell and the camp settled into an exhausted calm, Kohana finally spoke. His voice was weak but steady. "You could have run. You could have been free." Rebecca was sitting beside him, exhausted herself. She'd been up for almost 2 days straight. "I know. Why didn't you?" It was a question Rebecca had been asking herself all day. Why had she turned back? Why had she chosen to save a man who'd bought her like property? "I don't know," she said honestly. "I saw you hurt and I couldn't leave. Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe I've been here too long. Or maybe..." She paused, not sure how to finish. Maybe what? Kohana prompted, his eyes watching her carefully. Maybe you're not just the man who bought me anymore, she admitted quietly. Maybe somewhere along the way you became someone I couldn't let die. Kohana was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised her. He reached out with his good hand and took hers. His grip was weak but warm. Thank you, he said simply. You saved my life. You would have done the same for me, Rebecca said, though she wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Yes, Kohana said, and the certainty in his voice made her believe him. I would have. They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, neither speaking. The teepee was warm, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the camp was recovering, counting its losses, mourning its dead. They'd lost 2 warriors and several horses. It could have been much worse. I was dead inside, Kohana said suddenly, his voice soft. Since Ayana died, I felt nothing. Moved through days like ghost. But today, when that arrow hit me, when I thought I might die. He paused, struggling with the words. I did not want to die. For first time in months, I wanted to live, and it was because of you. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Kohana, you are angry at me still. You have right to be angry. I took you from your home, but you gave me something I thought was lost forever. You made me feel again, even when feeling was pain, was anger, was sadness. It was better than nothing. I don't know what we are to each other, Rebecca said honestly. I'm still not sure how I feel about being here. About any of this I know, Kohana said. I do not ask you to love me. I do not ask you to forgive. I just ask you to stay, not as captive, as friend, as person who understands. Rebecca looked at their joined hands. When had that happened? When had she started to care whether he lived or died? When had he become more than just her captor? I'll stay, she said finally. Not because I have to. Because I choose to. For now anyway. Kohana smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. That is enough. More than enough. As Rebecca settled in to rest, keeping watch over Kohana as he slept, she thought about the choice she'd made. She'd chosen to save him instead of saving herself. She'd chosen to stay instead of running. Maybe it was the right choice. Maybe it wasn't. But it was her choice, and that made all the difference. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the camp in white. Inside the teepee, 2 people who'd been brought together by chance and transaction were slowly becoming something neither of them had expected. Not captor and captive anymore. Something else. Something new. Something that might eventually look like home. The winter that followed the raid was the coldest Rebecca had ever experienced. The wind howled across the plains like a living thing, finding every gap in the teepee walls. Snow piled high around the camp, making travel nearly impossible. Everyone huddled close to their fires, conserving energy and food, waiting for spring. But inside Kohana's teepee, something warm was growing. It started small, almost unnoticeable. After the raid, Kohana's shoulder healed slowly, and Rebecca stayed close to change his bandages and make sure infection didn't set in. During those long, quiet hours, they began to talk. Really talk, in a way they never had before. Kohana started teaching Rebecca more Comanche words, not just the practical ones, but the beautiful ones. Words for the way snow looked in moonlight. Words for the feeling of coming home. Words for different kinds of love. His people had so many words for things Rebecca's language barely acknowledged, and Rebecca taught him more English, helping him with the complicated grammar and strange pronunciations. She taught him phrases her father used to say, stories from books she'd read, songs from her childhood. Sing it again, Kohana would say when she sang a particular lullaby her father used to sing to her. I like the sound. So she'd sing, her voice soft in the firelight, and Kohana would listen with his eyes closed, a small smile on his face. Those moments felt sacred somehow, like they were sharing pieces of their souls. One night, when the wind was particularly fierce and they were both wrapped in buffalo robes against the cold, Kohana began to talk about Ayana. Really talk about her, not just mentioning her name and going silent like he used to. She was terrible at cooking, he said, and there was warmth in his voice instead of just pain. Burned everything, even water somehow. He laughed softly. I used to tease her. She would throw food at me, then laugh when I acted offended. Rebecca smiled. She sounds wonderful. She was. Everyone loved her. She saw good in everyone even when they did not deserve it. He paused. She would have liked you, I think. Would have admired your strength. Tell me more about her, Rebecca said gently, and he did. For hours, Cohanna shared stories about the woman he'd loved, how they'd met, their wedding ceremony, the silly arguments they'd had, the dreams they'd shared for their future, the way she'd sing to herself while working, how she'd loved storms and would stand outside watching the lightning, fearless. Rebecca listened to all of it, and she didn't feel jealous or uncomfortable. Instead, she felt honored that he trusted her enough to share these memories. She understood something important. He needed to remember Ayanna to heal from losing her. Keeping her memory locked away wasn't protecting it. It was suffocating it. Thank you, Cohanna said when he finally stopped talking, his voice rough with emotion, for listening, for not being angry that I speak of her. Why would I be angry? Rebecca asked. She was part of your life. She made you who you are. I'm glad you're remembering her the right way now. With love instead of just pain. Cohanna looked at her and something in his expression made Rebecca's breath catch. There was warmth there, affection, maybe even something deeper. You are different from anyone I have known, he said quietly. Strong like warrior, but gentle like healer. Angry like storm, but kind like summer rain. I do not understand you, but He struggled for words. I am glad you are here. I'm glad I'm here too, Rebecca said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. I never thought I'd say that, but it's true. As the winter deepened, their conversations grew longer and more personal. They talked late into the night sometimes until the fire burned down to embers, and they had to add more wood to keep warm. They shared their fears, their dreams, their regrets. Rebecca told Cohanna about her father's death, about watching him slip away and being powerless to stop it. About how her mother had changed after, becoming hard and distant. About the moment she realized her mother was actually going to trade her away and feeling her world shatter. Cohanna told her about the 2 days Ayanna labored, about holding her hand and feeling helpless. About hearing his son cry once and then fall silent. About burying them both and feeling like he'd buried his heart with them. I did not want to live after, he admitted. I thought about joining them. Walking into winter storm and not coming back. But I could not. My family needed me. My tribe needed me. So I just stopped living inside. Easier that way. Until I came along and made you angry, Rebecca said with a slight smile. Until you came along, Cohanna agreed, and made me feel everything. Anger, yes, but also curiosity, interest. Later, respect, now. He paused. Now I do not know what I feel. But it is something good. Something warm. Rebecca moved closer to him under the buffalo robes. It was practical. They were warmer together. But it was also more than that. It was comfort, connection, trust. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said one night. Always. Do you still regret trading for me? Cohanna was quiet for a long moment, thinking carefully. I regret how it happened. I regret that you did not have choice. I regret your mother's betrayal of you. But do I regret that you are here now with me? No, I do not regret that. Good, Rebecca said. Because I don't regret staying. I regret what brought me here, but I don't regret where I am now. She rested her head on his good shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat like that, watching the fire, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. Over the next weeks, this became their routine. Days were spent with their separate tasks, Cohanna with the men, hunting when the weather allowed, caring for the horses. Rebecca with the women, preparing food, working on hides, learning more skills. But nights were theirs alone. They'd cook together. Rebecca teaching Cohanna some of her recipes and laughing when he burned things. They'd tell stories, sing songs, share memories, and they'd sleep close together under the buffalo robes, drawing comfort from each other's warmth. Pohai noticed the change. Everyone noticed. The other women would smile knowingly when Rebecca walked by. The warriors would tease Cohanna, making jokes that Rebecca didn't fully understand, but that made him shake his head and almost smile. He is different now, Pohai said to Rebecca one day while they worked. More like old Cohanna. The one before grief took him. You did this. I didn't do anything, Rebecca protested. He's healing on his own. No, Pohai said firmly. Healing does not happen alone. It happens when someone gives us reason to heal. You gave him reason. One particularly cold night when the wind was howling so loud it sounded like wolves, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay there listening to the storm, thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, she'd been a different person living a different life. Now she was here in a Comanche camp lying next to a man she'd once hated. "You are thinking too loud," Kohana murmured beside her. "I can hear your thoughts," Rebecca laughed softly. "Sorry, just remembering." "Remembering what?" "The day we met. How angry I was. How much I hated you." "And now?" Kohana asked, propping himself up on his elbow to look at her. Rebecca met his eyes in the firelight. "Now I think maybe I was brought here for a reason. Maybe not a good reason, not in a good way. But maybe we both needed each other. You needed someone to make you feel again. And I needed someone to show me that home isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's where you're chosen." Kohana reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate. "I do not deserve you." "That's not for you to decide," Rebecca said. "I'm here because I choose to be, because you're worth staying for. Even though I bought you like property, you didn't know me then." Neither of us knew what this would become. Kohana's hand lingered near her face. "What is this becoming, Rebecca?" She took his hand in hers. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." He leaned closer and Rebecca's heart began to race. She could feel his breath on her face, see the question in his eyes. He was asking permission, giving her the choice. She made it. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative. A first kiss between two people who were still learning each other. But it was also filled with promise, with hope, with the possibility of something beautiful growing from something painful. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. That was... Kohana searched for words. "Good," Rebecca finished. "That was good." They lay back down, this time with Rebecca's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close. "I think I am falling in love with you," Kohana whispered. "I did not think I could love again. Thought that part of me died with Ayana, but you showed me that heart can heal, that it can make room for new love without forgetting old love." Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. I fought it for so long because I was angry about how we met. But love doesn't care about circumstances. It just happens." "Yes," Kohana agreed. "It just happens." Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the teepee, wrapped in buffalo robes in each other's arms, two broken people had finally found something they'd both lost. Not just warmth or comfort or companionship, but genuine love, the kind that heals, the kind that makes you want to wake up tomorrow, the kind worth fighting for. Spring was still months away, but in their hearts it had already begun. When spring finally arrived, it came with unexpected news that would change everything. The camp was preparing for the warmer months, repairing teepees damaged by winter storms and planning the spring buffalo hunt, when riders arrived with information. A cavalry unit was camped 2 days' ride away, and they were negotiating for the return of white captives. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. Rebecca heard it from Pohai, who came to the teepee with a troubled expression. "You must decide," the old woman said gently. "The council says all captives who wish to return to White World can go. The cavalry has goods to trade. The council will meet tomorrow to discuss." After Pohai left, Rebecca sat in stunned silence. She had been with the tribe for almost a year now. A year since her mother had traded her away. A year since she'd become Kohana's captive. A year since her entire world had turned upside down. Now she had a choice. She could go back, but back to what? Her mother had taken her siblings to New Mexico by now. They'd probably told everyone Rebecca was dead. And even if she found them, would Ellen even want her? The woman had sold her for a horse. That kind of betrayal didn't just disappear. Still, she could return to white society, find work somewhere, build a new life among her own people, speak English every day, wear proper dresses again, go to church, live in a house with walls and a roof instead of a teepee. The thought should have filled her with joy. Instead, it filled her with confusion. When Kohana returned that evening, his face was carefully blank, but Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew, of course he knew. The whole camp was talking about it. They ate dinner in silence, neither knowing how to start the conversation they both knew they needed to have. Finally, as they were cleaning up, Kohana spoke. "The council meets tomorrow. You will be able to leave if you choose." "I know," Rebecca said quietly. "I will not stop you." His voice was steady, but Rebecca could hear the pain underneath. You came here without choice. If you leave, it must be your choice. I will not take that from you. Rebecca's hand stilled on the pot she was washing. What do you want me to do? Kohana shook his head. It does not matter what I want. This is your life. Your decision. It matters to me, Rebecca insisted, turning to face him. Tell me, do you want me to stay or go? For a long moment, Kohana just looked at her. Then he crossed the teepee and took her hands in his. I want you to stay. Every part of me wants you to stay. But I cannot ask that of you. I cannot keep you here like I kept Ayana's memory, locked away and never free. If you stay, it must be because you choose this life, choose me, not because you feel trapped or obligated. And if I choose to go? Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kohana's grip on her hands tightened slightly. Then I will let you go. I will give you a horse, supplies, everything you need. I will make sure you reach the cavalry safely, and I will remember you always as the woman who taught me to live again. Tears filled Rebecca's eyes. You'd really let me go? Just like that? Just like that, Kohana confirmed. Because real love means wanting someone to be happy, even if their happiness is not with you. Rebecca pulled her hands free and wrapped her arms around him. He held her tight and they stood there for a long time, both of them fighting tears. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay there in the darkness, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Beside her, Kohana pretended to sleep, but she knew he was awake too. She could tell by his breathing. The next morning, other captives began gathering. Rebecca was surprised to see how many there were. Some had been with the tribe for years, others for just months. Some looked eager to leave, already wearing whatever white clothing they'd managed to keep or acquire. Others looked conflicted, torn between two worlds. One woman, who'd been there for 3 years and had a young child, chose to stay. Her Comanche husband stood beside her, relief clear on his face. Several other women made the same choice, their lives too intertwined with the tribe to leave, but others chose to go. Rebecca watched them prepare, gathering their few belongings, saying tearful goodbyes. Some were leaving behind people they cared about. Others were practically running toward freedom. Pohai found Rebecca standing at the edge of the gathering. What will you choose, child? I don't know, Rebecca admitted. Part of me wants to go back, to try to find my family, to live the life I was supposed to have. And the other part? Rebecca looked toward Kohana's teepee. She could see him in the distance, checking on the horses, trying to keep busy. The other part knows that life is gone. That girl who lived on a farm with her family doesn't exist anymore. I'm different now. I've changed. Change is not bad, Pohai said wisely. Sometimes we must become new people to survive. The question is, which new person do you want to be? That question stayed with Rebecca all day. She walked through the camp, looking at everything with new eyes. The children playing. The women working together, laughing and talking. The men preparing for the hunt. The teepees arranged in a circle. Everyone looking out for each other. This community had taken her in, even though she'd been a captive. They'd taught her, protected her, included her. Pohai had become like a grandmother. The other women had become friends. The children had started to run up to her with smiles, trusting her. And Kohana, he'd become her home. She found him that afternoon by the river, watching the water flow past. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd heard her. Have you decided? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. I need to ask you something first, Rebecca said. If I stay, what am I staying as? Am I still a captive? Am I still property? Kohana turned to face her. You were never property to me. Not really. At first, maybe I did not know better, but you became so much more. If you stay as my partner, my equal, my wife if you will have me. You would have your own teepee, your own property, your own voice and decisions. You would be free to leave at any time if you wished. I would never hold you against your will again. Your wife, Rebecca repeated. You want to marry me? Yes, Kohana said simply. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you, but only if that is what you want too. Rebecca's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She could go back to white society, to everything familiar and safe, or she could stay here in the strange new world that had become home. What about Ayana? She asked gently. Will I always be second to her memory? Kohana shook his head firmly. No. Ayana was my past and I will always love the memory of her. But you are my present and my future. You are the one who made me want to live again. There is no competition between you. You both hold different places in my heart, and both are important. Rebecca took a deep breath. I'm afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid of choosing wrong. I'm afraid of regret. Fear is normal, Kohana said, but regret comes from not following your heart. So tell me, Rebecca, what does your heart say? She closed her eyes, listening to her heart. And in the silence, she found her answer. My heart says my mother gave me away, but you chose me. My heart says that white society would always see me as ruined or broken now, but your people see me as strong. My heart says that out there I'd be alone, but here I have family. She opened her eyes and looked at Kohana. My heart says home isn't where you were born. It's where you're loved. So you will stay? Kohana asked, hope blooming in his eyes. I'll stay, Rebecca confirmed. Not because I'm trapped. Not because I have nowhere else to go. But because I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us. Kohana pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt his tears on her hair and realized she was crying too. I love you, he whispered. I will spend every day making sure you never regret this choice. I love you too, Rebecca said. And I already know I won't regret it. Because you're worth staying for. The next day, the cavalry came to collect those who wanted to leave. Rebecca stood with Kohana and watched the captives ride away. Some looked back with tears. Others never looked back at all. A soldier called out, asking if there were any more who wished to return. Rebecca felt Kohana tense beside her, waiting for her to step forward. She didn't move. No, she called back. I'm staying by choice. The soldier looked surprised but nodded. The group rode away, and with them went Rebecca's last connection to her old life. As the dust settled, Kohana took her hand. No regrets? No regrets, Rebecca confirmed. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That evening, they stood before the tribal council and spoke their intentions. In the Comanche way, Rebecca placed her hand in Kohana's before the elders and the community. They spoke words of commitment, promising to support each other, protect each other, and build a life together. It wasn't the wedding Rebecca had imagined as a girl. There was no church, no white dress, no familiar hymns, but it was more meaningful than anything she could have imagined. Because this wasn't just about tradition or expectation. This was about choice, about love that survived loss and pain and circumstance. As the celebration continued around them, Rebecca and Kohana stood together, watching the stars come out over the plains. The same plains she'd crossed a year ago as a captive were now her home. The man who'd bought her had become the man she'd chosen. Life was strange that way. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. 1 year later, everything had changed again. But this time in the most beautiful way possible. Rebecca stood outside her teepee, one hand resting on her growing belly, watching the summer sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The baby inside her kicked, strong and active, as if eager to join the world. She smiled, placing both hands over the movement, feeling the life she and Kohana had created together. Still awake in there? She murmured. Your father says you're going to be a warrior with all this kicking. Behind her, she heard Kohana emerge from his teepee. Yes, his teepee. They had two now, built side by side. It had been Rebecca's idea, respecting both Comanche tradition and her need for her own space. Kohana had his teepee, which he'd finally allowed to change from the shrine it had been. Ayana's belongings had been carefully packed and given to her family, with love and respect, but no longer dominating his living space. And Rebecca had her own teepee, where she kept her things, worked on her projects, and sometimes slept when she wanted solitude. But most nights they slept together in Kohana's teepee, wrapped in each other's arms, planning for the future. It had been a good year. The best year of Rebecca's life, if she was honest. She'd fully integrated into the tribe. The women no longer saw her as an outsider. The children called her aunt and brought her wildflowers. The men treated her with respect, acknowledging her as Kohana's wife and a valued member of the community. She'd learned so much. How to track animals, how to read weather signs, how to preserve meat for winter, how to make beautiful things from leather and beads. Pohai had taught her about medicinal plants, and now other women came to Rebecca when they needed healing herbs or advice about illnesses. But more than skills, she'd learned about herself. She was stronger than she'd ever known, braver than she'd believed, more adaptable than she'd imagined. The girl who'd been traded away was gone, replaced by a woman who'd chosen her own path and thrived on it. Kohana came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands joining hers on her belly. "Our little warrior is restless tonight. Like father, like child," Rebecca teased, leaning back against him. "Or like mother," Kohana countered. "You were the one who fought me every day for months," Rebecca laughed. "True, maybe this baby will have both our stubbornness. That poor child." They stood like that for a while, watching the sunset together. These quiet moments were Rebecca's favorite. After the busy days, when the work was done and the camp settled into evening routines, they had this time just for themselves. "Do you ever think about your family?" Kohana asked gently. It was a question he asked sometimes, making sure she had no regrets. "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted. "I wonder if my siblings are well. If they're happy in New Mexico. If they ever think about me." She paused. "But I don't wish I was with them. This is my family now. You, this baby, Pohai, everyone here. This is where I belong. And your mother?" Kohana pressed. "Do you forgive her?" Rebecca thought about it. It was a question she'd wrestled with over the past year. "I understand her better now. She was desperate, trying to save her other children. She made a terrible choice, but maybe it was the only choice she could see. Do I forgive her? I don't know. But I've let go of the anger. It was poisoning me, and I needed to let it go for my own peace." Kohana kissed the top of her head. "You are wise beyond your years." "I had a good teacher," Rebecca said, turning in his arms to face him. "You taught me that healing is possible, that love can grow even in the hardest soil, that sometimes the life we're forced into becomes the life we were meant to have." "I think we taught each other," Kohana said. "You taught me to live again, to laugh again, to hope again. Without you, I would still be dead inside, just going through motions." Their conversation was interrupted by excited voices. Several children ran past, chasing each other in a game. One of them, a little girl about 6 years old, stopped to talk to Rebecca. "Will your baby play with us?" she asked in Comanche, her eyes bright with excitement. "Someday," Rebecca promised, switching easily to the language that had become as natural to her as English now. "When the baby is big enough." The girl nodded seriously, then ran off to rejoin her friends. Rebecca watched her go with a smile. That little girl, Kimmy, had been one of the first to befriend Rebecca, bringing her flowers and asking endless questions. Now she was practically bouncing with excitement about the coming baby. "The children love you," Kohana observed. "You will be a good mother." "I hope so," Rebecca said, feeling a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. "I'm terrified I'll do something wrong." "All new parents are terrified," Pohai said, appearing beside them as she often did, seemingly from nowhere. "But you have whole tribe to help. And you have Kohana, who will be father who never stops worrying." She smiled at Kohana's mock-offended expression. The old woman had become even more important to Rebecca over the past year. She was grandmother, teacher, friend, and counselor all in one. When Rebecca had questions about pregnancy, Pohai answered them. When she felt overwhelmed, Pohai calmed her. When she needed to talk about her fears, Pohai listened without judgment. "The baby will be loved," Pohai continued, patting Rebecca's belly gently, "by parents who chose each other, by tribe who welcomes new life. That is all any child needs." A traveling preacher had passed through the camp a few months ago, offering to perform Christian marriages for any mixed couples who wanted them. Some had accepted. Kohana had asked Rebecca if she wanted it, if having a Christian ceremony would make her feel more married. Rebecca had declined. The Comanche ceremony, where she'd placed her hand in Kohana's before the council, had meant more to her than any words from her mother's religion could. That ceremony had been about choice, about commitment made freely and witnessed by their community. No white preacher's words could make her feel more married than she already did. Besides, the God she'd grown up believing in didn't live only in churches or speak only in English. He was here too, in the wide-open plains, in the sunrise, in the love between two people who'd found each other against all odds. As darkness fell completely and stars began to fill the sky, the camp settled into its nighttime rhythm. Fires burned in front of teepees. Families gathered together. Songs drifted through the air, carried by the gentle evening breeze. Kohana led Rebecca to sit by their fire. He'd become skilled at anticipating her needs during pregnancy, making sure she had the most comfortable seat, bringing her water before she asked, rubbing her aching back without being prompted. "Tell me again," Rebecca said, a request she made often. "Tell me about what we'll teach our child." Kohana smiled. He loved this game, this planning for the future. "We will teach our child to be brave but not foolish, strong but kind. We will teach both ways, your white ways and my Comanche ways. Our child will speak both languages, understand both worlds. We'll teach them about both families," Rebecca added. "About Ayana, who would have loved being an aunt. About my father, who loved horses and singing. About all the people who helped shape us. We will teach them that home is not a place but people," Kohana continued. "That family is not just blood but choice. That love is stronger than circumstance. And we'll teach them their mother was once a captive who became free by choosing to stay," Rebecca said. "That their father was a man who thought he'd never love again, but found his heart could heal." Kohana took her hand, raising it to his lips. "We will teach them that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in thoughts of the future. Rebecca thought about the baby who would soon arrive, about raising a child in this world between worlds. Their child would be unique, belonging fully to neither white society nor Comanche tradition, but creating something new that honored both. It wouldn't be easy. Rebecca knew that. There would be challenges. The white world was encroaching more every year. The old ways were changing. Difficult times were ahead for all tribes, but they'd face it together, this little family they'd built from broken pieces. "Do you remember the day we met?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "Every detail," Kohana said. "You were so angry. Eyes like green fire. I thought you might try to kill me in my sleep," Rebecca laughed. "I considered it a few times." "I know," Kohana said with a smile. "You were not subtle. But I also saw your strength, your refusal to break. Something in me responded to that, even when I did not understand why." "I thought you were cold," Rebecca admitted. "Heartless. It took me so long to see past your grief and understand you were just broken. Like me." "We fixed each other," Kohana said simply. "Two broken pieces that fit together to make something whole." As they prepared for bed that night, Rebecca felt overwhelming gratitude for the strange path her life had taken. Yes, she'd been traded away like property. Yes, she'd lost her home and family. Yes, she'd been taken against her will, but she'd also found love. Real, deep, transformative love. She'd found strength she didn't know she had. She'd found a community that valued her. She'd found purpose and belonging. Lying in Kohana's arms, feeling their baby move between them, Rebecca finally understood something important. Life rarely goes the way we plan. Sometimes it tears us apart, breaks us down, forces us onto paths we'd never choose. But sometimes, if we're brave enough to embrace the unexpected,